Hello, friends. Dave makes fun of me because I do that, but I don't care. He can be a hater all he wants. So, for tonight's Samhain episode, I'm going to talk about the differences that I see between how Druids celebrate Samhain and how witches celebrate Samhain. And I'm going to make the standard disclaimer that I always make in saying that I am not an expert in Druidry, and I'm not an expert in witchcraft. I'm an independent druid. I do things my own way. I'm also Christian, and that's really important because druids come in all different flavors, just as I think witches do. And there are religious druids and philosophical druids. I'm a philosophical druid. I am a Christian religiously. Witches have a similar kind of structure where some are religious and maybe Wiccan, and some are not religious, maybe pagan, maybe atheist, maybe monotheistic, whatever. You know, there's all different flavors of both of those things, and that's important to know. So I'm coming to it from that lens, and one day maybe I'll go into the differences within Druidry itself of the different practices there are, but I probably don't know them all, to be honest. So I can only tell you what I see, having watched a whole lot of videos, and I'm going to reference some people, excuse me, some people that I think are really useful. There is a witch named Thorn, who I'm going to link below. She's really been a tremendous help. I've watched a lot of her older videos. It really explained a lot. She has a really clear way of explaining witchcraft, and she's been a practicing witch, now I know, I didn't know this before, for more than 20 years, because I saw a video where she talks all about that, and looks over her journals. But I think she comes to the discussion with a lot of honesty, and that's really helpful. I'm also going to tag a guy who looks at the history of Scandinavian, I think, witches, but he has a lot of historical information, and I will link him below too. And I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try, but I will link him below. And then a third guy that that I watch occasionally, because he does do a lot of spells, and I don't know anything about spell work, so I don't know if they're legit or not in the witchcraft world, but I do find the videos easy to understand, right? And so I will link him below as well. So I will also link below resources about Druidry, so that, and OBOD is sort of the biggest organization that has the most content out there, as well as the Druid Network. So I will link them below so that you can learn more on your own and really, get a sense on your own. But when it comes to Samhain, and it comes to how things are celebrated, it's sort of the same theme as all of the eightfold wheel cycles. Now, in the Celtic tradition, we celebrate the equinoxes and the solstices. Those are the main four that we celebrate. And then, some of us celebrate the other four, but not to the greater extent that the other four are celebrated. And I think, from what I can tell, in witchcraft, all of the 8-wheel celebrations hold equal weight, and they're like high holy days or whatever, high days, and Sabbats, I believe they're called, and they all have different meanings, just like they do for Druids, but they're celebrated equally. Let me put it that way. So, looking at Samhain just in itself, both the Druid tradition and the witchcraft tradition, and when I talk about witchcraft, I'm going to include Wiccans in that. I do know that they're different. Wiccans are a subset of witchcraft. There are witches who are not Wiccan, but all Wiccans are witches. So and in my understanding, again, not an expert, but from what I can tell, both parties practice or understand that Samhain is the thinnest veil between the living and the dead. So that is something. And from what else I can tell, it's also a time of reflection and a time of, it's the new year. It's the new year of the witch cycle. It's the new Celtic New Year for Druids. So that's the same. and the ceremonies seem to be very, very similar. There's always fire at Celtic celebrations, and it looks like there's always fire at witchcraft celebrations. There are people who practice nude witchcraft. I believe there are people who practice nude druidry, so I think that may be similar. I have never encountered that, but I'm independent, so I don't belong to a grove, just as an independent witch or a solo practitioner doesn't belong to a coven. So I think there's also that understanding that there are people who practice in groups, and then there are people who practice alone, and I'm a person who practices alone. So I think that the major themes of, honoring the dead and celebrating the successes, reflecting on things that weren't so successful, making intentions for the new year, I feel like that is the same between Druidry and witchcraft. So then it begs the question, well, what is the difference? And I thought about that, like, what is the difference? Because there are some Druids who do magic. I'm not one of them, but there are some who do. So what's the difference, right? I've been watching all these videos. I've been very interested in these shadow books that they create. And I will say that that's probably a thing that I don't see in Druidry. We don't have... Everybody's encouraged to journal, and I think that's true in all of Druidry, and certainly that's a practice that I have. But there isn't... We don't have spell books necessarily, unless, and in this case, I'm speaking about Druids who don't practice magic. I have no idea. I've never met a Druid that actually practices magic, but I know there are some that do. We don't have shadow books or spell books or anything like that because we don't practice magic. I don't practice magic, so that's not a thing. But I do have something similar because I have a book where I have like all the runes in it. I have recipes for the different recipes that I make, and some of the rituals that I do. And, we hear rituals and we automatically think we're sacrificing goats. We're not. Just different things for intention, right? And we do rituals in the church. We have the candles that we light and the prayers that we say and the genuflecting, whatever it is. We have things that we do. So it's not different, really. It's all about your intention and what you mean and what you bring to the honoring that you're doing, right? So I would say that that's definitely something that I see different. Druids don't have shadow books necessarily, although they might journal, right? And I've seen some very elaborate shadow books because I've been really just kind of interested, like what they put in them and what's interesting. And then I thought, well, my notebook isn't too much different, but it is because I don't have spells in it, right? I do a lot of things with herbs and try to use whole natural medicine as much as possible. So I do have, healing things that the recipes are in my book. But I don't cast a circle, right? I don't know what that is actually. I've just heard that the witches talk about it. We don't cast circles. We don't have, I don't have any candles of any certain colors that do anything because I don't do magic, right? So I'm not, and that isn't a slam to people who do. I just don't, in my tradition, do that. So, I think it's interesting because Thorne talks about, like, you don't have to have all those things. And I feel like in Druidry, like, it's sort of the same thing, like the things that you have to have. Like, do you have to have, like, the antler head gear, and do you have to have the white robe, and do you have to look like Merlin from comics and the movies? And the answer is no, you don't need any of that stuff. I don't know any of that stuff. And I am just as much a Druid as anybody else. Although some would say that I'm not, because some Druids really oppose Christians being Druids, and Christians oppose Christians being Druids. So it's a lonely road when you're a Christian Druid, but there are quite a few of us out here. So I think when I think about the real difference between Druids and witches, it really falls on the magic line, because both groups seem to really have a respect and an adherence to the natural world, right? And to nature, right? We are very connected to nature and revere nature. We're very connected to the sun and moon cycle, and we all, I think, feel a responsibility for the resources provided by the natural world. So, so that's very much the same. I think the rituals of the bigger groups, like maybe the bigger covens and stuff like that, I think that might be more in line. I don't do them, so I've never seen any witchcraft stuff, and I have really only participated really as an observer like once or twice to Druid kind of stuff that wasn't specifically labeled Druid. So I've watched some things online, but I always feel like it's church. If I wanted to go to church, I'd go to church. And I'm an independent Christian, so I'm not going to give up one church to go to another, I guess is where it lies. So I think one thing that sort of binds both groups together is that if Druids and witches lived in Salem in Massachusetts, we'd have all been burned at the stake because it looks very much the same. It really does look very much the same, but there is a difference. And the most significant difference that I can see, at least in my own practice, is that I don't perform magic. And so whenever Thorne is talking about like different terms that are specific to witches that deal with magic, I have no idea what she's talking about. Then I look it up and I'm like, oh, casting a circle, that's what that means. Okay. But I think the intentions, for some of the spells are very much like intentions that we set as Druids when we're doing reflection. I would also say that the Druid culture is much more based in storytelling, which makes sense because Druids historically were bards, storytellers. So a lot of, in the same kind of tradition like Native Americans or Indigenous Americans have, there's these stories that get told generation to generation. And the stories hold these meanings, and they're usually about like gods and people, and they teach a lesson. So I haven't seen that really at all in witchcraft. I haven't seen the stories that we have in Druidry that get passed down. Another thing that I think is very similar, but also very different, and I learned tonight watching one of Thorne's videos, is that some Druids think that you have to go through initiation, that you have to go through training to be a Druid, and that historically Druids had to go through training. We don't have any real evidence of that. We have evidence that some Druids went through training, but Druids didn't call themselves Druids, right? I don't think, way back, before the written language. The one thing that we know about Druids is that, and we know this because the people who conquered them wrote this down, is that it was an oral tradition because they believed that the written word was sacred. They could write in Greek and Latin. They could write in Ogham, which is the Irish language, but they didn't write because it was considered sacred. And so the stories were passed generation to generation. So if you wanted to be a bard of it, a Druid, you had to study from another bard. You had to study and learn the stories so that you could then tell the stories. So, I think what Thorne was talking about in witchcraft, they have, some covens require that you go through this initiation process. I have no idea what's involved in that. But, can you be a witch if you just say I'm a witch? Can you be a Druid if you just say you're a Druid? Can I be a Druid without having gone through Obad's training? I believe you can, and in the Druid pathway, it's allowed. Some would say that I'm not a real one because I haven't gone through some kind of lessons or training. But I have to say, and I have infinite respect for Obad, so this is not a slam against them because I understand why they do it. I have a real hard time paying all that money for knowledge because knowledge should be free. And I know people's time and effort, I'm a professor, and so time and effort goes into preparing those courses, and I get that. I get that. But I also think that knowledge should be free. Knowledge is part of the Druidic tradition, and I think the stories were passed down freely from generation to generation from our ancestors. I have a real hard time putting money on that. So it isn't that I can't afford it, because I can. It's more of a principle to me. It wouldn't matter if it was $1, right? I don't mind tipping like the teachers that put the physical materials together, I don't mind tipping them. But when you're charging for knowledge, like, I have a problem with it. And you can disagree with me, and that's fine. But in my path, I just think that knowledge, just like the wilderness, I get really irritated when I see lakes that are private access, because those lakes belong to the earth. They belong to everybody, right? It's the same irritation that comes from that. So I think it's interesting that I think some of the drama that happens in the witchcraft world, based on stuff that I've heard from Thorn and stuff that I've heard from Witch in Making, or Witch in Working, I feel like a lot of that same kind of drama happens in the Druid groups too. So, and a secular notion, and one of the reasons I want to be independent, and that I will probably always be independent, is I saw a lot of that drama in the church, which is why I left the church, right? So I don't want my Christianity or my Druidry impacted by all these human laws that make it impossible to celebrate God and to celebrate the earth, right? Like, I feel like all this other stuff is just a giant distraction from our purpose of shedding light, or sharing light and love, right? When all these rules come in, and you're a bad witch if you do this, and you're a bad druid if you do that, like, who are you to say, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it makes it very hard for people to know, right? And then when you gate it with money, like, that's even worse, because we know that we don't know anything about Druidry. We know that. We know that because our books were burned. We know that, right? When we were conquered, our stuff was burned. Our people were killed. And there were some secret druids who passed the stories down generation to generation. And we have some materials, right? We shouldn't be putting a lock on them, right? They should be for everybody, because it really does. I don't like elitism in anything, even in higher ed, which is the industry in which I work. I've been at MIT. I taught at Penn State. I ran a gaming, robotics, and programming institute at MIT. Like, I've been at Ivy League schools, and I prefer community college. There's a reason, because I really feel that knowledge should be, our society will get better. Violence will drop. Illness will drop. War will drop if people are educated, right? We can't fix this world if people aren't educated, right? And that should be as free as possible. And I don't like this elitist idea that you have to be part of a special group, or you have to be a certain color, or you have to be a certain gender. Like, I don't like the barriers that humans put on sharing light and love. And so, and it's funny because, people will say, well, Druidry is very open. We're very open to everybody. Are we? How many, people who are Black or African American or African in general, how many of them are Druids? How many Hispanic Druids do we have? I mean, really, in the world, like, how many are there? I'm not going to speak about witchcraft, but from what I can see from witchcraft, I see some, Black or African American witches, but I don't see many, and maybe there are lots and lots of them, but they feel like they can't come out in the community. I have no idea. And maybe that's true in Druidry as well. But when I'm looking at, the Druid group, at least, I'm seeing a whole lot of upper middle class white people. And I just don't think it's as diverse as it could be, and as it should be. And one of the ways that we remove the barrier to diversity is by removing the cost involved, whatever that cost is, whether it's financial or having to travel to Stonehenge. How many people can afford to travel to Stonehenge? Who can take off from work to go to Stonehenge? We don't even know that Stonehenge was built by Druids. It was probably built by the precursors to the Druids, but, who can afford that? And so you're in if you go to the in things, and you're out if you go to the out things. And I don't like that, because I think those are barriers to light and love. Light and love starts with us sharing the message of light and love, and that we are all physical beings, and we are souls having this physical experience. We are not physical beings having a soul experience. I think another difference that I see between witchcraft and Druidry is, or at least my understanding, and again, independent, is that witches seem to do a lot to manipulate the natural world through spell work and things like that. And that's not a criticism. It's just that, in my practice, ours is much more meditative, right? So we're not physically manipulating the world, but we're, setting intentions, and we're reflecting, and we're doing what we can. And a lot of our work really is focused on the natural world. We don't necessarily do things for love, like love spells, love intentions, like that sort of things, like human sort of emotional things don't seem, prosperity, things that I see that different spells that I've seen, that I've witnessed through Witch in the Working, and that Thornton's talked about. I don't see the same kind of like vibe. We don't do that. Like almost everything that Druids do has to do with the natural world, like preserving the earth, saving the earth, honoring trees, honoring nature, using nature collaboratively, respecting the trees, respecting the underground network of the mushrooms and the trees and stuff like that. Like I've never really encountered love spells and things like that. We do have, like, in our eightfold wheel, we do have fertility celebrations and Thanksgiving celebrations and the same kinds of celebrations, but there seems to be a little bit of a difference about, like, really the root cause and meaning of those. And I think that's probably where I'll end, because this video is already 21 minutes long, and I don't want to keep going, but I would love for you to comment, subscribe and comment. Apparently that helps with an algorithm. I don't get any money for this channel, nor do I want to. So I would love to hear or see more differences, and I, again, recognize that I am an independent Christian Druid with my own set of beliefs, and that I'm on my own path, but I absolutely respect the paths of others. And that is the one beautiful thing I think about both traditions that I can see, is that I think there is that, like, well, we're the right kind of witch and we're the right kind of druid. I think there's a lot of that, because humans are humans. But by and large, as a whole, I think that witches respect all the different kinds of witches there are, whether you're a forest witch or a sea witch or a kitchen witch or whatever kind of witch you are. And I think in Druidry, the goal is to say, all druids are druids. You're on your path, you're on your path, your grove does this, your grove does that, the independents do this, and it's all good because we are a path-based philosophy, we're a path-based religion, and so everybody is equal in that way, right? And I feel like that's pretty awesome, because you don't actually see that in the church, right? So, Protestants, there's a bazillion different kinds of Protestants, Episcopal and Lutheran and blah, 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 blah. And, they're all talking trash about each other, and this one's good and that one's not. I'll give it to the Catholics. They just think everybody else is wrong, right? But there are also a bunch of different kinds of big C Catholics, little C Catholics. So there doesn't seem to be the same kind of division in Druidry and in witchcraft. It doesn't seem to be. I think we're all unified by the main thing, which it would be awesome if Christians were all unified by being Christian, right? And it didn't matter if you were Bible Fellowship or if you were Episcopalian, like you were unified as Christians. That would be awesome, but that doesn't happen. So I think that's something that both witchcraft and Druids get right. Absolutely right, that they respect the paths that other people are on and don't judge them. Do no harm. That seems to be a predominant theme for the witches, from what I can see. And Druids, because we don't do magic, we're not really doing harm to people, but we are celebrating the stories and honoring our ancestors, because that's so important to us, and honoring the earth. So, but I think there's an acceptance that your path is your path, and my job is to help you on your path as much as I can without compromising my own beliefs. But my main job is not to prevent you from being successful on your path. And I think, I don't know that Christians get that right. So, all right, that's my spin, and I'm wishing all of you all the best and light and love. And we're almost to Samhain. I'm going to actually do do some actual ritual stuff with you on the next video, so that if you wanted to try some things at home, you can. And on Saturday, I'll be going to a ritual, a Samhain observance, and I'm going to be open-minded. I'm going to try my best, because I'm not really into the group thing, so we'll see how that goes. All right, wishing you all the best in light and love. Be well. Bye-bye.